Hello, teachers. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome. My name is Janine Matts. I'm an English language specialist with RELO. And today's topic of today's webinar, as you can see on the holiday screen, is Crash Course in Linguistics. So let's get started right away. I would like you guys to please share in the chat right from the beginning, if you can, some of your comments on these questions that we have here. So have you studied linguistics before in your university or in separate classes? In what capacity? Was it part of your studies to become an English teacher? Do you have a favorite branch of linguistics? By branch, I mean some of the things we're going to see today, like phonetics, phonology, morphosyntax, semantics, pragmatics, sociolinguistics, etc. And have you ever applied linguistics somehow in your classroom? This is also something that you can comment on now at the beginning or throughout our webinar today. Please feel free to share your experiences with the subject of linguistics. Okay, what are we going to look at today? As you can see in the table of contents, we're going to start with talking about phonology and phonetics, then morphosyntax, semantics, pragmatics, sociolinguistics, and psycholinguistics. This is not all of the branches of linguistics that we have, but these are the main ones, and this is what we have time to talk about today. Hello, everybody who's joining us. Hello to Peru, hello to Ecuador, Bolivia, hello to everybody who is joining us. Okay, so what is linguistics? First, we have to define what this is. Linguistics is defined as the scientific study of language and its structure. So those people who call themselves linguists are actually scientists. I am a linguist, so I am a scientist of language, right? This goes beyond teaching different languages. Oftentimes the stereotype or the thought when someone says, oh, I'm a linguist, they say, oh, how many languages do you speak? Right? But studying linguistics is not about speaking several languages. Speaking several languages would be someone who is a polyglot, right? But linguistics is the scientific study of language in general. Okay, starting with perhaps the smallest unit of language, which would be phonetics and phonology. How do we define these terms? Phonetics is the study and classification of speech sounds. And phonology is the study of speech sound patterns. So if we look at phonetics, we're talking about individual sounds of a language. So for example, when we have the letter S, right, normally in English, this letter is pronounced S, just like in Spanish. We also have the same grapheme, that is like this, and also a corresponding phoneme, which is S. Yes. Phonology, on the other hand, takes it to a little bit bigger scale where we look at patterns in sounds. So for example, phonology studies something like the ED pronunciation in English, right? You know how in regular past tense verbs in English, we have this ED morpheme at the end that indicates that it's past, right? I remember back to the first English class that I taught here in Quito, Ecuador. I live in Ecuador, right? The first English class that I taught, one of the students asked me a question and said, how do you pronounce the ED at the end of past tense verbs? And I thought about it. I had never taught English before. I only taught Spanish, right? So I thought about it and I said, ed, right? Ed. I mean, ED is ed. They said, no, but you say talked, right? And you say called, and you say waited. As a native speaker, I had never realized that there were 3 ways that we could pronounce the ED ending of past tense verbs. I was shocked. This is something that we study in phonology because this is a pattern of sounds, speech sounds. These are speech sounds coming together, right? Phonetics are individual speech sounds. Okay, This on the screen looks like maybe a foreign script to some people, right? But these symbols that we see on the screen are elements of what we call the IPA. IPA stands for International Phonetic Alphabet. It is a series of symbols, as you can see on the screen here, that represent sounds. So if I learn the IPA, I am capable of pronouncing any language in the world as long as it is written in IPA. You see? So these sounds on the left side, you can see, represent the consonant sounds that we have in English. These are phonetic maps. Why is it in this order specifically? Well, if you look at the picture on the left side, what do we have? We have the profile of a person's face, right? And here we have where in the vocal cavity, let's say, each of these sounds is articulated. When we study phonetics and we study consonants, we study point of articulation, the place of articulation. Is it in our alveolar region, our palatal region, interdental, labiodental, etc.? We study manner of articulation. Are they continuous sounds? Are they stopped sounds, etc.? And then we also study a characteristic called voicing, the voice quality. Are the sounds voiced or voiceless? In other words, when I produce a sound, do I have vibration of my vocal cords or not? And how do I determine this? One way to determine this is I can take two fingers like this, right? And I can pronounce a sound. So let's take the S sound, S, right? If I put my two fingers here, almost where my pulse is, but a little bit more forward, if I put my two fingers here and I say, S, right? S, I don't feel anything. Try it. Everyone can try it. Do you feel vibration here? S. No. Now, if I change that sound from the S sound to the sound that the Z makes in English, like in the word zoo, right? If I say that sound and I hold that sound like Z, and I put my fingers here and I say Z, my fingers tickle. I feel vibration, right? There's vibration there. So that means that the Z sound is voiced and the S sound is voiceless because there's no vibration of the vocal cords. And this works well to help our students to really feel the sounds. Besides feeling them in their mouth, they can also feel them with the voiced and voiceless quality, because a lot of our students, for example, especially the Spanish-speaking students, will make mistakes because the S they think is just pronounced S, right? Okay, but in some contexts, it's pronounced Z. Like, for example, I say this, right? This, but then I say these, and we can feel the vibration. So when we work with our students with pronunciation of specific phonemes in English, we can have them do this as well, feeling their vocal cords vibrate, so that they can really physically feel the difference between the different phonemes in English, right? That works for consonants. For vowels, it's a different type of classification. As you can see on the right side, this is a vowel phonetic map. And what does it represent? It represents, as you can see, we have front, central, and back. So we're looking at the profile of a face. Again, just like in the picture on the left, we have the front of the mouth, the center part of the mouth, and the back part of the mouth. And then we have open vowels where our mouth is really open, right? And closed vowels where our mouth is really closed. So for example, if we take the one that is at the bottom of the chart, it looks like a letter A written. This sound represents ah, right? So if I say ah, I can feel how my mouth is very open. So it's an open vowel, and it's not all the way at the front of our mouth, but it's not in the back either. It's somewhere in the middle. Ah. Compare that to the vowel E, which is the first one. the first one in the top left corner in the vowel chart on the screen, this one is a closed front vowel. So E, you can see how my teeth are E, ah, E, right? And it's towards the front of the mouth, E. The tongue is pushed towards the teeth, whereas ah, the tongue goes back. Yeah. So these are ways that we can classify consonants and vowels according to their place of articulation and things like that, different features, right? So we can teach our students the International Phonetic Alphabet, the IPA, so that they can identify these sounds in the symbols. We see them in dictionaries sometimes, and they can understand what those sounds represent, how to pronounce them. Okay. I've included in each section a little slide about either activities or apps or programs, websites that work with phonetics and phonology. So you can take a look here. The links won't always be copied in the chat, but all you need to do is type in Google, for example, search for example, Lalilo, and you can find it, right? It will appear right away. So you just search for the names, okay? Okay, we have, yes, as Chelsea comments, love using the color vowel yoga. This is the first one that we have here is the color vowel chart, which is on American English for Educators. The address is americanenglish.state.gov. This is a website that is sponsored by the United States Department of State. And if you go to this website, you will see a chart similar to the one we saw on the previous slide, but it has different colors and it has different words, and you can interact with the vowel chart. It gives you examples of words that contain those vowels, right? So for example, horse, you click on horse and it will play it for you. You hear the vowel in there and you see it on the chart where it is located in the pronunciation in your mouth, yeah? This is especially important because I think teachers will agree and let us know, but I think you agree that one of the challenges for our students as far as pronunciation is vowels. Why is this the case? Well, it has a lot to do with the first language vowel system. So for example, our students, if they are native Spanish speakers, they have 5 vowels, because in Spanish we have a, e, I, o, u, right? That's it. But in English, we have, depending on the dialect of English that you are working with, we can have anywhere between 14 and 18 different vowel sounds, depending on the dialect. So this makes it very difficult for our students to broaden their spectrum of vowels and to be able to not only recognize, but themselves produce those vowels. So these vowel charts definitely help with this. Okay, we also have some other websites that I encourage you to explore on your own. Unfortunately, because of time constraints, we don't have the chance to go into each one of them. But we have, for example, Say It. That's for English pronunciation. This was developed by Oxford University Press, and it's an app that helps students improve the clarity of their pronunciation. Lalilo, like I was mentioning, there's a free version and a paid version, and this covers every letter, sound, and word family and gives students practice reading stories. We also have the Montessori Words and Phonetics. This app helps the kids understand the words are made up of sounds or phonemes. And then for our more advanced students and for the older students, I would say at least high school, so 14, 15 years old, university level as well, adults as well. We have a more scientific program that is called Pratt that you can download for free onto your computers at pratt.org. And there what this program does is you upload recordings of your voice or of other speakers or of whoever, and it gives you a visual image called the spectrogram of what the sounds look like. Maybe some of you have seen this before. If you see on the slide in the computer screen, this is an example of what is generated by Pratt. What is the benefit of this? Yes, it's very scientific for linguists to analyze vowel formants and things like that, but it also has a practical purpose for our students, which is to be able to see visually where their pronunciation of a word, a sentence, whatever, differs from the pronunciation of a native speaker. So these are very useful tools that we can work with. But again, Pratt is not for kids. It's too difficult to operate. So at least 14, 15 years old and above, we can work with Pratt. If you have used other applications or other tools to work with pronunciation, to work with phonemes, phonetics, let us know in the chat. Share these sources with us. We also have a lot of new AI platforms that are coming out that are specifically like avatars to practice English. So we also can make use of those, but please share your own ideas with us in the chat. Okay, that brings us to morphosyntax, which is actually the combination of morphology and syntax together. In common terms, we might consider this grammar. Yeah? But if we divide it into its two parts, morphology refers to the study of words, including the principles by which they are formed and how they relate to one another within a language. And syntax refers to the study of how words and phrases are arranged to form grammatically correct and meaningful sentences in a language. Okay, so the combination of these two is basically grammar. Okay. How do we study this from the perspective of linguistics? And it's perfect timing because we're in a holiday season and we have trees all over. And now we're going to talk about morphology and syntax trees. On the left side of the screen, we have a morphology tree. Yeah. And on the right side of the screen, we have a syntax tree. What is the purpose of these? The purpose is to show how on the left side, how words are put together in the brain. Right? And on the right side, how sentences are put together. On the right side, the syntax tree actually represents what we think native speakers have in their brains for the grammar of their language. Yeah? On the left side, we have this word that seems to be written twice, and it says unlockable. But as you can see, depending on how we divide the morphemes, which are the smallest unit of a word with meaning, depending on how we divide them, we can get two slightly different meanings out of the same word. So on the left side, as you can see, if we start with the root, okay, lock is the root, right? But then if we put unlock, we know that that means to do the opposite of lock, right? Unlock is a verb. And then if we put onto that verb able, then we have unlockable. What does this mean? This means that it is something that is able to be unlocked. Yeah. So this door is unlockable. That means I can put a key in it and I can unlock the door. Yeah. On the right side of the morpheme trees, we have the same word, but we start with the root, which is lock, and then we add able onto it, right? Lockable means something that is able to be locked, right? But if I say unlockable, then it means something that is not able to be locked. You see how the meanings changes slightly depending on where we start building the word, from what morpheme, lock, and then what we add to that. Yeah, so when we talk about morphemes, we could talk about bound morphemes and free morphemes. Free morphemes are the ones that can stand alone, like lock. That is a free morpheme because it means something by itself. It's a word, right? We also have bound morphemes, which are the morphemes that we put on to other morphemes and form words, like un. Un is a bound morpheme because it cannot exist as a word. Yeah, or for example, ing. Ing, right? That is also a bound morpheme because ing cannot exist as a word, yeah? And on the right side, like I mentioned, we have what we call a syntax tree. In English, syntax is quite complicated when we get to the deep structure of it. So I'm not going to explain this whole tree because that would take an entire semester. But the idea here is that in English, for example, when we form question words, we have movement, right? Where the WH word goes to the front and leaves a trace where the object would be. And then we have tense, which is marked by the auxiliary did or whatever the case is. You see, so there's a lot of movement happening here. Syntax is quite complicated. Yeah, when we look at it from this deep structure perspective, but this is what it looks like in the minds of native speakers. Okay. Okay. Good, Santi. I'm glad that you use trees for teaching order of words. That's really a fun activity, I think, for the kids. Okay. I think this is really cool to look at it from a contrastive morphosyntax perspective. Contrastive meaning that we contrast, in this case, the first language and the second language. Okay, so if we look at these sentences, I have on the left side a sentence in English that says, I like coffee, right? And on the right side, I have the equivalent sentence in Spanish. For those of you joining us from different parts of the world, perhaps you can also imagine in your first language what something like this would look like, right? To do the comparison between the first and the second language. Now, what do you notice about the two columns? Look at the English side and look at the Spanish side. Those of you who are Spanish speakers. I know that you don't need to say, a mí me gusta el café. You can just say, me gusta el café. Yes, I know. But the reason we include a mí is so that we can move all of these parts around and play with the sentence. What do we notice between the English side and the Spanish side? You can comment in the chat if you would like. And there's a hint on the screen that is the star. There is a star before a lot of the English sentences. What does that star mean, that asterisk? What does that mean? Does anyone know what it means when we put an asterisk before a sentence? What that means in linguistics? Maybe some of you are familiar. When we put a star, it means that the sentence is ungrammatical. And what do we mean by ungrammatical? It means that no native speaker would ever produce that sentence in real life. Yeah. So if we look at the English side, we have lots of stars. The first sentence is fine, right? I like coffee. That's fine. But every one of you should say the next one is bad in English. I coffee like? No. Like I coffee? No. Like coffee I? No. Coffee like I? No. None of these work in English. The last one is a maybe. Coffee I like. Okay, we can say that sentence with a comma after coffee and only in specific contexts. Like, for example, if my friend says, do you like tea? I say, tea, no. Coffee I like, but not tea. You see, but only in a specific context. Otherwise, we have to say, I like coffee. That's it. In Spanish, on the other hand, look what we have. In Spanish, we can take a mí, me gusta, el café, and move each one of those elements in 6 different orders, and the result in Spanish is always grammatical. It always works in Spanish, right? A mí me gusta el café, bien. A mí el café me gusta, bien. Me gusta a mí el café, bien. Me gusta el café a mí, bien. El café a mí me gusta, bien. El café me gusta a mí. All of those are fine. Yes, you wouldn't necessarily use them in all the same contexts, right? But all of them are grammatical. They work for native speakers. In English, it's not the same. So what can we say? We can say that the morphosyntax, specifically the syntax, the word order in English, is much more rigid than the word order in Spanish. What does this mean in our classroom and with our students? That a lot of times we have interference from the first language that makes our students produce structures in the second language that are ungrammatical. And in the case of native Spanish speakers, that often happens because Spanish syntax is very fluid. It's very flexible. You can pick up and move pieces and the sentence works, right? So this is why sometimes we hear our students say things like, I like very much the music. Because in Spanish we say, me gusta mucho la música. And that works fine. But in English that doesn't work. I like music very much. Yes. You see? Okay. Thank you, Lourdes. Okay. So here are some apps and websites about morphosyntax. It's harder to find these. It's harder, but we do have some that are about morphosyntax. So we have etymoonline.com, which, if you guys know, etymology is the study of the origin of words. So this works with related words that are related to each other, and word origins. Yeah, we'll actually find that between Spanish and English, we have a lot of words with Latin roots. So they have similar origins. And I learned a lot of words in English because I learned them in Spanish first, which was quite interesting. Then we have the Mini Matrix Maker. This online tool allows you to make small word matrices with or for students. It creates a visual representation, not just of how words are put together, but also the relationships between words, which is semantics, which we'll talk about in a moment. Then we have Membean Word Parts, which is basically an interactive list of roots. And by interactive, I mean there are little speaker icons, and you can play the speaker, and there's what they call a rootcast, like a podcast, but a rootcast. So it explains the part of that word, for example, that free morpheme or whatever the case is, right? And there's examples and how to use them in context. The audio recordings are actually quite entertaining, so it makes learning about morphology more fun. Yeah? Okay. So I encourage you to take a look at those. Just Google the names of them and you'll find them. Okay. Moving on to semantics. Semantics is the study of the meaning of a word, a phrase, a sentence, or a text. Within semantics, we have different branches, sub-branches of semantics. So for example, formal semantics deals with logic, truth value, things like that. Lexical semantics deals with the relationships between words. Conceptual semantics deals with the cognitive structure of meaning. So we have a lot of different subdivisions of semantics. But what are some things that semantics deals with? Semantics looks at synonyms, for example, which I'm sure you are familiar with. Synonyms are the words with similar meanings, because we linguists usually say that there are no two words that have the exact same meaning. They are slightly different, right? So synonyms are words with very similar meanings. Antonyms, which are words with opposite meanings. Polysemy, which is words with several meanings, yeah. Homophones, which are words that sound the same but are spelled different. For example, pear, the fruit, right? Pear, and pair, like two people, which is P-A-I-R versus P-E-A-R, yeah. We also deal with connotation and semantics, which is a set of associations that we might have with a certain word or phrase or something. Ambiguity is also something that semantics deals with, the ambiguity of words. So this is often created by words that have several meanings. I have an example here, like if an airline company has a slogan that says, "We fly over 1 million people," here over has two possible meanings. One is flying over like a place, like we flying over the city of Lima, or flying over Peru, or flying over a geographical space. But we also have fly over 1 million people, like more than 1 million people, right? So there's this ambiguity there. This is something that we study in semantics, and it's quite entertaining, but it also causes headaches. So this is something that we like to look at. Okay. Some apps that will work with semantics are one that is creatively titled Semantics. This helps to understand the meaning of words and phrases through definitions, synonyms, antonyms, and examples of how words are used in context. It also covers topics such as phonetics, phonology, morphology, and syntax. So the app is more complete than simply semantics. We also have TouchLearn, which helps students practice vocabulary skills, problem solving, and reasoning. It also includes a keyboard with added support to help students practice the spelling of vocabulary words. Spelling is very challenging, very, very challenging for English language learners, because English has what we call deep orthography. What does that mean? That means that the correspondence between the graphemes, the letters that we write, and the phonemes is not close. For example, in English, we have the word knife, right? Knife that we cut with. In English, we spell that K-N-I-F-E, right? But we only pronounce 3 phonemes. So we have silent letters, we have some letters that change the vowel sound, things like that. So English pronunciation is quite difficult. I always tell my students here in Quito They're native Spanish speakers. And I asked them, how did you learn to pronounce English? Mis respetos, because I think it's so challenging to pronounce English. So this is an app that helps us also with those, with spelling, yeah? Calimity is where it's an app that we can use to create our own dictionary. You can add words and phrases, provide explanations, and link them to specific real-life examples. If you happen to work in a region of your country where you don't have a lot of internet connectivity, where you cannot work with apps all the time, where students do not have their own cell phones or tablets, for example, have them buy a little tiny notebook, right? One of those little pocket-sized ones at any store. And they can carry around a pen and a little notebook. And every time they learn a new word that's new for them in English, they can create their own personal dictionary. So we can have them write A and then skip 2 pages, write B, skip 2 pages, write C, and then they alphabetize their dictionary with their own new words, with an example. We try to avoid translation if it's possible. We don't need to always translate into their first language, but they can write a simple definition or draw a picture or use it in an example. This is a case where if we don't have a lot of technology or resources, we can use the old-fashioned way, which is pen and paper, and it works just as well, okay? Okay, that brings us to pragmatics. Pragmatics is the study of language in context or language in use. Pragmatics can include a strong cultural component, which is something that we need to be very aware of. For example, the way that we greet people in different parts of the world might be very different. And even if we're talking about different parts of the world where they speak the same language. So for example, to greet someone in the city where I'm from, in Chicago, if it's someone that I know already, it is sufficient for me to say, hi, that's it. Or, hey, that's all. That's sufficient, and that's considered okay according to social norms in Chicago. But maybe that is not okay if we do that in Dublin, Ireland, or maybe that is not okay in Sydney, Australia, or in London, or in Toronto, or in other English-speaking places. Maybe that is considered impolite. I learned this the hard way when I moved to Quito. In Quito, it is the saludo, as we call it, is very important, very fundamental for the culture. And I had transfer from my English. So I would say hello to my colleagues at the university by simply saying, hola, until I realized the hard way that that is not polite. That is not polite. That is not a nice way, an accepted way to say hello to people here in Quito. In Quito, you have to use the person's name also. So hello, Janine. Hello, Marta. Hello, whatever, yeah? Or good afternoon, so-and-so. Good afternoon, Pedro. Good afternoon, Mario, whatever. It's not sufficient to say, hey. So this is why I'm saying there's a very strong cultural component associated with pragmatics, yeah? Pragmatics examines speaker intent. Why what is intended is or is not communicated. And this is why a lot of times we have breakdowns in communication. For example, if there is a scenario where there is a girl and there is a guy and they are on a date, let's say, and they are sitting on his couch and they are watching a movie, and the girl says, I'm cold. What happens? What is she trying to communicate to the guy? Probably that she wants him to hug her, right? But sometimes the guy says, oh, okay, I'll close the window. And this is why we have communication breakdown. You see, this is why we have a problem in communication. Okay, we also have cooperative principle and maxims, which is by a philosopher named Paul Grice. These are the rules for conversation. We study implicatures, beyond what is said, reading between the lines, like we call it. If the girl says, I'm cold, she wants the boy to hug her, right? Speech acts, what do we do with language? We can promise, we can threaten, we can bet, we can whatever, right? We also look at politeness and face and how we can appeal to and threaten other people's faces, which is their public image. So when we compliment someone, we are appealing to their positive face. We are making them happy. They feel confident. But if we interrupt someone, then we are threatening their face because they want to be able to speak without being interrupted, right? So these are all things that we study within the field of pragmatics. Some apps and websites to work with pragmatics. There is a good article on American English for Educators, again, by the US Department of State. You have the address there. That there's a downloadable article on how to incorporate pragmatics in the classroom. This is one of the different types of competences when we talk about linguistic competence in general. We have strategic competence, we have grammatical competence, we have discourse competence, we also have pragmatic competence. And this is an important point to develop, especially in our more advanced learners, because pragmatics usually comes with more exposure to the language. We can also work with AI, again, like ChatGPT and others, to analyze conversations for politeness, for appropriateness, etc. Yeah, we can create a conversation and ask ChatGPT if this is appropriate for a business interaction, or if this conversation is considered polite, impolite, why is it polite, in a US dialect of English, in a British dialect, whatever. Yeah, so we can play with artificial intelligence to teach us more about things like that. Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Henry is commenting back on what we were talking about pronunciation, is the difference of pronouncing desert and dessert, right? That's right. The stress is different. That's true. And I remember the spelling, when I learned the difference between spelling of desert and dessert, they always taught us you only want to cross the desert once, but you want to eat 2 desserts. So that's how we learned to remember that desert has 1 S and dessert has 2 S's, because you like 2 desserts, but you only want to cross the desert once. Yeah. Okay. All right. That brings us to sociolinguistics. As you can see, socio, the prefix here, the morpheme, socio, combined with linguistics means the study of language in relation to social factors, including differences in social categories, race, education, etc., gender differences, and bilingualism. Sociolinguistics looks at, among other things, race and ethnicity. So, for example, if you are familiar with the dialect of English that is spoken in the United States called African American Vernacular English, this can be also traced back to African Creoles, right? So we look at those types of things in sociolinguistics. How did African Creoles affect the English that is spoken by many African Americans in the United States? They look at social class. How do higher social classes speak differently from lower ones? Age. Sometimes we have changes in generations between pronunciation of words, vocabulary, things like that. Gender. How men and women speak differently. Sexuality. This is becoming a popular field of study in sociolinguistics. Gay speech, for example. What are some of the characteristics that define gay speech? We have education level, geography. For example, the people in the highlands, how do they speak different from the people in the coast, and vice versa? And other factors affecting social factors that might affect language. Okay, a website that I like to work with, even with my university students, is this one that I took a screenshot of that's on the screen here. That is the IDEA Global Dialects Map. Yeah, it's in the dialects archive. So what they did was a group of linguists collected samples of speech of English from around the world. And all of these red dots that you see on the screen there represent someone speaking English that is from that part of the world. There are samples from Peru. There are samples from Ecuador. There are samples from Pakistan. There are samples from all different countries. Yeah. You can click on this map, and when you click on a dot, a specific location, it will open up a window that will give you the demographic information of the speaker who is in the recording, and then you will listen to a recording. Part of the recording is the speaker reading. And another part of the recording is the speaker responding to open-ended questions about themselves, telling anecdotes and things like that. This is really interesting because we hear a difference between how someone reads the language and how someone freely responds to questions. When they read, they're usually much more formal in their pronunciation. When they speak spontaneously, it changes, right? So it's quite interesting to observe that. What I like to do with students here is allow them to play with the map. Say, go home and play with the map, yeah? Click on different recordings, listen to them. And then I usually ask my students, okay, I want you to choose a recording that sounds the most similar to the English you have learned, right? So one that is very familiar to them, yeah? I ask them to choose a recording that is extremely difficult for them to understand. And then I ask them to choose a recording that they think sounds pretty. Now, normally this goes against how linguists think because we don't judge people's ways of speaking, right? We don't say one is better than the other. No, they are all equal. But the different ways of speaking are like different instruments in an orchestra, right? So in an orchestra, all of the instruments are instruments. They all contribute with an important part of the song, right? But they all sound different from each other. That doesn't make one instrument wrong or bad, no. But we sometimes have a preference for the flute or the French horn or the violin, right? Ooh, I like how this instrument sounds. So I have them look at the different accents and I say, which one do you like the sound of? It sounds pretty to you, yeah? So they also like to explore with something like that. So this is a good sociolinguistic activity to do. And last but not least, for our tour, a very quick crash course and tour of linguistics is psycholinguistics. As you can see, psycho meaning the mind, right? Combined with linguistics, this is the study of the mental processes in the mind involved in language comprehension and production. You may have heard of neurolinguistics as well. Neurolinguistics is another field of linguistics, and this is more related to the anatomy of the brain related to language, right? So we know that a lot of the language faculty is located in our left hemisphere, more specifically in our left temporal lobe, which is right above your ear. And even more specifically, much of our language faculty is located in Broca's area and in Wernicke's area that are both right here most of the time. But not all of the time. If we have patients, for example, with brain damage, we can see that other parts of the brain will pick up where they're failing in those areas, right? So it's quite interesting how the brain is it has that plasticity quality to it that it can be flexible and compensate, yeah. What do we look at in psycholinguistics? Speech production. How are we able to go from a thought to actually enunciating something, yeah. Speech comprehension, how you perceive an oral stimulus and then you are able to process that and understand the message. Written word comprehension, how does our brain read, right? How do we process the meaning of words we see? Linguistic disorders, for example, dyslexia, which is a disorder related to reading, dysgraphia, which is a disorder related to writing, aphasia, which is basically any disorder that affects language. We have Broca's aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia. We look at gestures, like for example, when I talk, I gesture a lot. But why do I gesture? What do those gestures mean? I'm not always drawing pictures with my hands, but I'm moving them. Why do I move them? Because it helps with my fluency, even in my native language. We found that out. So these things we study in psycholinguistics, and super important is language acquisition. We study how humans naturally acquire language so that we can come up with the best strategies to teach students language, right? Okay, what can we do with psycholinguistics in the classroom? This is a little bit more scientific, but we can have students conduct their own experiments, and this does not require technology. So for example, you can have students do a gestures experiment at home with their families. Normally this is done in the native language, But if they have native speakers of the language that they know that they're learning, that's fine. So you would tell the speaker to explain how to get from their house to somewhere, a supermarket, something like that. Yeah. And then you would ask them to explain how to get from their house to the stadium, for example. But the second time, they need to put their hands behind their back. And they have to explain it with no gestures. And you'll see how uncomfortable most people feel when they have to speak like this. Their fluency is greatly affected. Yeah. We can also work with tongue twisters. Tongue twisters are fun to practice pronunciation, but tongue twisters have nothing to do with your tongue. They have everything to do with your brain, because your brain gets stuck in a pattern. It's not your tongue. So you can have students practice tongue twisters and things like that and figure out where they have trouble, right? Where they get stuck. And it's usually because it's a pattern that's broken. Yeah. There are also some online experiments that students can participate in, but these are for very advanced learners of English who already have a good background, because these are a little challenging. So this is a website that goes with a psycholinguistics textbook, and these experiments they can participate in. They're online and they're free. Okay. So that's basically a very quick run through linguistics. I want to respond to Henry's question right here, what to do with someone who stutters very much. Stuttering is a very difficult problem to fix because it's very inherent. And so a lot of times to work with stuttering, we need to work with repetition a lot. Slowing down and repetition, slowing down and repetition. And all of these psycholinguistic disorders that our students might have in their first language, they also have in their second language. So if they're dyslexic in Spanish, for example, they're going to be dyslexic in English. And dyslexia is also something that we can work with by having students use their other senses. So for example, if a student cannot, because they're dyslexic, they have trouble reading, we have them write the word with their fingers so they can feel how the word is, right? We have them repeat the word and hear the word. Involving the other senses in dyslexia really helps with working with it. Okay, but that would be another topic for another webinar. So that brings us to the end of this webinar today. I hope that this has been at least a good review for some of you. I know some of you know about linguistics already. Maybe you've learned something new today. I hope that the resources that we've shared are useful to you. And I would like to invite you to join the Zoom session today at 3 p.m. So in approximately 12 minutes, we will join on Zoom. The Zoom address is on the Facebook page. Feel free to join me if you have other questions or you would like to share some ideas you have about linguistics. Thank you so much for joining us. I wish everyone a very happy holiday and a happy new year, and I'll see you guys in January. Take care. Bye.